Good morning. I am Mercedes Caron from the European Forest Institute, and I would like to welcome you all to the fourth webinar in preparation to the 8th Mediterranean Forest Week. This webinar is part of a series of webinars that are being hosted in preparation to the 8th Mediterranean Forest Week and are meant to discuss the different topics that are going to be tackled during the 8th Mediterranean Forest Week between the 4th and the 7th of November in Barcelona. These webinars are meant to set the tone and start the discussions about the different topics that are going to be addressed during the Mediterranean Forest Week and will be later complemented by the keynote speakers, the panelist discussions, and the posters that are going to be presented during the conference. All this information will eventually feed into the roadmap that is going to be elaborated at the end of the conference. The webinar of today is about species range shift in the face of climate change and is a webinar co-organized by the European Forest Institute and CESE4. For the webinar of today, we have two keynote speakers, Silvio Schweller from the Austrian Research Center for Forests and Achille Mauri from the ETH of Zurich, Switzerland. For the webinar today, we'll have first a presentation, followed by some time for questions and answers that will be facilitated by Pablo Sabin from CESE4. So if you have questions, please add them in the chat. Later, we'll have a presentation by Achille Mauri, and again, we'll have some time for questions and answers. This webinar will be recorded and will be available in the Mediterranean Forest Week website. So please visit our website also to rewatch the previous webinars. I don't want to steal more time from the speakers, so I will give the floor directly to Silvio. Silvio, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mercedes. Hello, everyone. I'm trying to share my screen now. So thank you very much for inviting me to this workshop. Sorry, technical issues. Yeah, okay. My topic today is assisted migration in forestries, genetic matters for maintaining the forest carbon sink. This is a work that we have done at the Austrian Research Center for Forests in cooperation with many partners from across Central Europe, but also with some partners from Mediterranean Europe. But at the beginning, you might wonder why someone from Austria should tell you something about Mediterranean forests. And the issue is that we all see and face climate change. Climate change already is a main problem in European forests. This is a typical picture that we've seen in some parts of our country already, where bark beetle has killed a lot of the previous Norway spruce stands. However, besides bark beetle, there are also several other issues that increased within the past years. A lot of disturbances caused by the climate change already. One of them is storms, which got more severe and more intensive within the last years. Bark beetles, as I said, are today not only a problem at the low elevations and in planted or secondary forests. We also see them within the past years also in mountain forests at high elevation going up to 1,800 meters, where they destroy our valuable protection forests, which protect the settlements and the infrastructure below. However, we also see the wildfire intensity and frequency increasing. This is much more typical for Mediterranean forests, but in the past years we also have experienced a lot of these fires. So it's a common issue that we see across Europe. And there is an issue, for example, that we still have, and this is that snow breaks or any large, let's say, precipitation events might occur in the summer or in the winter and then destroy a lot of our forests. That means we see a lot of these forests And one issue with which we are working already since a long time is that we are discussing that if the tree species with which we are working in forestry will also be suitable in the future. This is a research topic that it's not new. Already around 15 and 20 years ago, scientists across Europe discovered that there is a strong relationship between the occurrence of the species and their climate conditions. And these relationship between occurrence and climate have been used in the past years to identify what kind of changes in the tree species distributions will we see within the next 100 years. And this is just an example for Norway spruce here. Norway spruce was in Central Europe and in Northern Europe the most important conifer. What we have seen in the past 10 years is that in Central Europe, in Germany, Czech Republic, but also parts of Austria, drought and bark beetle killed a huge part of these populations. And if we go into predictions for the future, the situation is getting more and more worse. These important species will probably just survive on the higher mountains in the Central European area. However, the problems with the tree species changes are not only for our economically important species, also our ecologically important species such as European beech, pine, and oak species also are considered to see changes. There was a huge study about 10 years ago when they found out, or when they estimated the changes in the major tree species. And we see declines for beech, spruce, Scots pine, black pine partly. And you see the only tree species groups which are considered to see an increasing distribution area are the different oak species. What I call here is oak number 1. These are the more Central European white oak species, Quercus petrea and Quercus robur. However, the most increase in potential distribution area are considered for the Mediterranean and more drought-resistant oak species. Oak species that you know well how to manage them. So you see that the species that are now occurring in the Mediterranean will likely see a larger distribution in the near future. So these are the predictions I said, which are already 10 years old. And now is the question, are we on the way yet? Do we see already some of these changes ongoing? Has policy already started to improve the situation and change it? And this, just a few figures from the Austrian seedling market might maybe give you an idea on that. This is the national statistics on the Austrian seedling market from the last 10 years. And this is just for the conifers here. Conifers, especially Norway spruce, have been the main tree species that have been planted in afforestations within the past. And the sales were high above 50 million. But you see, let's say within the past 10 years, the sales for Norway spruce declined and are being now below 10 million species, while some other conifer species like silver fir, Ibis alba, or large increased. Partly also some non-native tree species like Douglas fir also improved in the number of species seedlings being sold. Also, we already see that the number of broadleaf seedlings sold increased significantly. We see especially an increase for the oak species because we consider them as the most the best adapted to the future conditions. However, also beech increased slightly, and a lot of different minor species which contribute significantly to provide more mixed species in the future. Anyhow, you see we are here in the range of 2 to 4 million species, while in the conifers we were still in the range of 10 to 15 million species being sold. So, of course, we see already a change in the policies, and also we see a change in the behavior. The question is whether just the changes with our species that we know today will really help us for the long-term future. To think about that, I always like to have let's say, a view back in the long past. And I like this study from Burke et al. from 2018 in the lower part of the graph, where we showed the past climate changes and compared the past climate changes within the last 60 million years with the changes that we are already seeing and which are predicted until the end of the century and beyond that. And what you see here is that 50 million years ago, it was much warmer on the globally than it is today. And then within the last 50 million years, the Earth went through a steady, continuous decline of the global temperatures. And just within the past million years, we have seen these shifts. This is around in the middle of this figure here, and these where these continued. These were the ice ages, where we had a cold time and a warm time just behind each other. And just at the part where this yellow line starts, this is the, I would say, more or less stable climate that you see. That's only the last 10 to 15,000 years. That our ecosystems, that our forest ecosystems have adapted to. And within these short time, species from the Mediterranean region, where the most species that which we are working today, let's say, survived the ice ages. And just within this short time, these species migrated from southern Europe to Central and Northern Europe. And astonishing is, if we look then in the future, the ongoing and the expected climate change, then we see that depending on which climate path as a society we finally are able to get through, we might see by the end of the century, either the climate that at the last time appeared on Earth 3 to 5 million years ago. So if you just get a straight line here, so you end about at a Paris Agreement or with an increase around 2 degrees Celsius. Or in the very worst cases, if we are not able as a society to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, then we might end in 100 or 200 years with a climate change of up to 5 to 8 degrees Celsius. And then we will see on Earth a climate that for the last time on Earth has been visible 20 to 40 million years ago. So that's a very, very long time. And it's very difficult to think about what kind of ecosystems occurred at that time. However, we have from the fossil, from paleobotanics, we have a basic understanding what kind of tree species occurred in different parts of the Northern Hemisphere. And there are well found infos on the fossil tree genera in Eastern, Western, North America, as well as in Central Asia. And if you look in the back, then you see that, let's say, Europe also had a very high diversity of different tree genera. There are paleobotanical evidence of around 130 different tree genera at that time. However, due to these long-term climate changes, as well as due to these to the different ice ages, only a small part of these these high tree diversity survived until today. And especially Europe, especially affected by these changes of the climate, because today we find only 29% of the tree species diversity or of the tree genera diversity that existed 50 million years ago, while the other continents are not so much affected. And there are different hypotheses. Why is this? And the most convincing, let's say, suggestions and causes for that have been that there was a mismatch of the species niches and the changing environments. And there were, during the ice ages, lacks in adaptation and migration of the tree species when they moved north and south and back and forth again. So this should show you that if we look at the changes that we see in the future, there might also many of our tree species will face problems in local adaptation and migration. In forestry, within the past 50 years, we already discussed a lot on what kind of measures are possible to, let's say, to conserve forests. And nowadays we went away from conserving forests as they are, but we think that it's much more important to defend or conserve the ecosystem service that forests provide to our society. And we kind of tried to categorize in an earlier project what kind of defense systems we have to conserve forest ecosystem services. And then we have some defense systems which are, let's say, easy to implement because they maintain a lot of the present ecosystem services. Then there might be some other defense measures that a little bit more, that also consider more changes in the forest structure and also in the ecosystem service itself. And there might be much more serious defense systems needed for some parts of Europe or of Austria, and in our case, where we see the strongest changes. And among the different defense mechanisms or measures is, for example, assisted migration, or the use of more climate resilient genotypes, or also some silvicultural measures like stronger pinning measures to try to keep the present ecosystems as well as their biodiversity in approximately the state that we have seen today. And this is the point where I want to talk about today in the coming 10 minutes about it. This is mainly the topic of assisted migration. What is this assisted migration? We have heard that migration naturally took place and still takes place for forests, and that trees have not been able to follow the rapid changes of the past. And therefore, scientists more than 10 years ago already started to think about that we might need to support the tree species to catch up with the changing climate. And very simply speaking, this lower part here is the present distribution area of the species. And in climate change, we consider that these distribution, that in the south, at the warmer edge of the distribution areas, some population, some part of the tree species will get extinct, some local populations. But however, in the north, at the colder part of the tree species distribution area, there might be new areas where the tree species might be able to grow and survive. And within this area, we could see assisted species migration, because there is a species which is not yet there, finding a new habitat. However, we have also a huge part here where we have the species at present and in the future, which does not mean that we should not do something here. Instead, we should think about what is the genetic diversity that we have in the different parts of the distribution area. And if we understand that, then we should consider also moving seeds from the warm edge of the species distribution area, let's say to the more northern parts, which will experience a similar climate in the future. This thing is not only just a concept. Many scientists around the world discussing that or starting to implementing that. And there is already some advanced developments in some countries. Canada, US, Sweden, for example, have a good breeding system which can be used also for assisted migration. But for example, especially in Canada, the province of British Columbia are very well advanced in this topic, and they already developed policy timeline for implementing these what they call climate-based seed transfer rules. And with this policy timeline, they already want to make it mandatory in the future that reforestations on groundland in British Columbia need to consider assisted migration when being undertaken. The question is, what have we achieved in Europe, and can we follow up with that? And what would be the cases in Europe? The point is that at the present there are still many open questions on the assisted migration front. First, we need to understand which tree species harbor adaptive genetic variation related to climate. We, of course, need to identify the valuable populations, the forests for seed transfer, which harbor the genetics that we need at some other parts. Of course, we need to think about the climatic limits for seed transfer. We know that although we see, for example, in Austria, a warmer temperature today, we still see huge frost events. We still see a lot of snow at some times in the year. That means we cannot just move everything along, but we have to consider also that there are limits in the seed transfer and the potential migration. And of course, there are some other issues. We would need to make sure that some species also develop some resistance against some diseases. And also, we do not want to use assisted migration just to spread more diseases from one part of Europe to another part. This is also a very important thing. And finally, there is an issue of the implementation. Europe has a lot of small countries. Each country develops its own policies in case of reforestation, although there is a common legislation on forest reproductive material, each country implemented it in a different way, and that might create problems in the final implementation. So much more open question probably can be found. What we have done in the previous project was that we were just interested in to understand what could assisted migration deliver to European forests. And one of the big databases and data understanding for assisted migration are the so-called provenance experiments. These provenance experiments are experiments which are already more than 100 years old, where forest scientists at that time thought about that they would like to have trees from the same species which grow faster, which are more straighter, which have a better quality, and so on. And these provenance trials have been established already more than 100 years ago. And within the past 30 years, we found out in these provenance tests where, let's say provenance from Italy or Spain or Greece are being planted in Austria or Germany, and vice versa, but also German or Austrian material is being planted in Italy, that these experiments provide an important databases for understanding local adaptations and for understanding how far assisted migration can take place. And the problem was all these data have for a long time been just managed on the national levels. And it was very hard to bring all this data together and to understand what these trials mean across Europe. So what we have done in an earlier project was that we developed a harmonized database of provenance trials across Europe, which covered from Central and Northern European species, in total around close to 600 different provenances. And within these provenances, we have more than 1,000 provenances. That means regions from where the seeds of these species have been harvested and then brought together. This is just an example for one of the species we were studying with. This is Norway spruce, and you see the red dots are the provenance experiments that have been established within the past. Some of these provenance trials are in Turkey, some in Bulgaria, some in Romania. This is the most southern ones. And the blue dots are the provenances, and these provenances come from across the natural part of the distribution, but also partly from planted afforestations, like for example here one in southern Italy. And what we did with all this data, we brought them all together and developed so-called universal climate response models, where we could understand the growth of the species at these provenance experiments, independence of the climate of the planting location. These are the red dots, and in response of the climate of the seed source locations. This is just a very simple diagram to show, let's say, the high variation independence of the mean annual temperature. However, models like these for PCR hours are much more complicated, and they contain a lot of different climate variables. We tested for each different species which are the most important climate variables of the provenance region and the site in order to establish these models. And what we can do with this, if we have made this analysis, then we can cluster the distribution area of a species. Like here we stay with the Norway spruce example, We can cluster it in different seed provenance regions. All of them have a different climate in their regions, and then we can predict for the present climate as well as for the future climate which provenance region would be the most protective at a certain point in Europe or in any forests around the world. So these are the cedar regions, for example, for beech as well as for Norway spruce, and these are the same colors apply here for the regions where these provenances should be planted, should be reforested. And we in this study made which has been our study has been published in the summer, and we made seed recommendations now available for 7 species. These are for this earlier project: silver fir, beech larch, Norway spruce, and the 2 oak species. And for each of them, we identified what are the most important seed provenance regions that should be used in future afforestations. And then we were finally interested in whether the use of these seed provenances would make any differences in the forest ecosystem service provided. And at the present time, one of the most important ecosystem services across Austria is certainly the carbon sequestration, because European forests within the past 80 years were a continuous sink for atmospheric carbon dioxide, and there is a huge, let's say, a social need to continue that our forests are still a carbon sink in the future, because so far there are very, very few technical solutions to get the carbon that we have in the air out of the air into, let's say, into other products. And we were addressing then the question, how much carbon could be added to European forests if proper trees and proper seed provenance is being planted. And we made this under the assumption that we, of course, want to transform and reforest our forests with the tree species suitable for the future climate, so more mixed, more deciduous forests. And we want to look at the reforestation forest regrow until the age of 40 years. Because this is the databases that we have, and we were only interested in the actual forest area, but not on new afforestation on other land sources. And just to look at what is the state of the European forest in terms of the forest carbon sink. If we look at the Forest Europe from 2000 report from 2020, then the European forests are a major carbon sink in the past decade, with increasing carbon stocks in forests and in wood product. And these carbon sequestrations of 155 million tons of carbon per year accounts for around 10% of the greenhouse gas emissions of the European Union, which is a huge part, of course, not enough. So what we did on the one side, we considered that we should not only that we need to transform our forests and let's say use tree species which are suitable for the future. And here I come back to this earlier study which showed this tree species change across Europe. We did a very similar thing. We looked at a tree species change with these kind of models. In the past, the most suitable species in the area would have been pine, silver fir, or PCR Norway spruce. In the future, we would see that huge parts of Europe should be rather reforested with one of the oak species. So this is very similar to any further earlier study that has occurred. And then we check what would it mean if we then either look at use local seed sources, or we use the best seed sources that we are able to get from across Europe, from the different growing regions. And this here shows the annual carbon sequestration in million tons or teragram in above ground living biomass. Under the present situation with the present tree species composition, we would see that in these young afforestations, they are sequestering about 44 teragram carbon per year. However, if we change that to other tree species, and we consider also the declining productivity of these forests, then we will see that under the climate change scenario 4.5, by the mid to the end of the century, we would also, these carbon sequestration capacity would be reduced to only 30 teragram. If the most serious climate change scenario will come into place, then it would be further reduced to 25 teragram. However, with our model that are based on empirical data from our provenance experiments, we were able to suggest also what would be if we would just take better seed sources. And then we would see, let's say we would take better seed sources already under the present climate. And that shows that even if there would be no climate change and we would select the best seed sources that we can see in our provenance experiments, we would be able to add around 20 teragram carbon sequestration annually to European forests. And in climate change, if there were just a moderate climate change of 2 to 3 degrees Celsius, we would see an increase in the carbon sequestration capacity of the forest. And even in the worst climate change scenario, we would see that with just selecting the best provenances from across Europe, that we could maintain the forest sequestration capacity on the same level as what we have today. And this is a very, very strong evidence that assisted migration might play an important role in our future forests. At the moment, we published our study this summer, and we brought all these information now together. At the moment, these recommendations that we can give are not finally useful for the praxis, but we want to inform policymakers, we want to inform nurseries that assisted migration is an important part of forestry and of climate change adaptation. And we developed a platform, Seed for Forest.org, which have been financed by different projects, and which is now within another project going again through some additions and through an update. Here you can get the first information of let's say, how to select the best tree species and how to select the best seed sources. However, at the moment, we face the problem that the data that we require to give really good recommendations for across Europe are often not there because there are no good European databases existing on all the seed sources. And on still for many countries, we don't have enough data on provenance experiments. So I come to conclusions here for my study. What we see is that a change of dominant forest tree species is required in large parts of Europe to facilitate resilient forests. There is very, very high evidence on that from the research of the past 20 years. We will see that there especially is a need for changing to more broadleaf and mixed forests in many parts of Europe. However, this change will result in a decreasing carbon sink or a decreasing carbon sequestration capacity of these forests in comparison to the forests that we have today. However, if we are combining the species change with the provenance change, then it will result into the possibility to maintain the forest carbon sink also in the future. These are the main conclusions from our study that we have published recently. And now you will ask you, so what does it have to do with Mediterranean forests? We were not able in the previous study to include Mediterranean forest ecosystem because they're not for many forest tree species. There are good provenance data available. However, if there are a couple of papers, especially from Spain and from France, where researchers also studied the adaptive variation, the intraspecific genetic variation, and the plasticity of tree species, and where they find a similar evidence for the effect of provenances on the species occurrence. That means if I take the best provenances, I might even be able to work with species also in the future that otherwise would get extinct. On the other side, there is also evidence that using the best seed sources, like here from Spain and France, these are species Pinus halepensis as well as Pinus pinaster, we would be able also to increase productivity and therefore also forest carbon sequestration capacities. However, we need also consider that Mediterranean forests are also important sources, seed sources for the assisted migration, as Mediterranean forests are mostly located here at the warm part of the species distribution area. These populations, these forests, have a much higher risks of getting extinct in climate change. With these large-scale forest fires, large-scale drought problems, and large-scale pests that you also experienced within the past, there might also be the high risk that the genetic diversity of these populations, which are there much longer than the forests that we have in Central Europe, there is a high risk that these populations with the genetic diversity might get lost, not only for the Mediterranean countries, but for all Europe or for the humanity. And then we might see also that some species, some of the tree species really might get extinct also in the future. That means there is a huge requirement also for in situ and ex situ conservation of the genetic diversity in the Mediterranean area. And these especially this ex situ conservation should be combined with the possibility for assisted migration. At the moment, we are in contact with a lot of people in Southern Europe, with Italy, Serbia, Montenegro, and other countries to identify good seed sources for afforestations in our areas, to discuss good practices in seed harvest, seed management, think about ex situ conservation. We want to establish, for example, seed orchards for Calabrian silver fir in Austria in order to make sure that these important seed sources are also maintained for the long future and so on. So there is a huge field for cooperation in terms of conserving the genetic diversity and also using this genetic diversity for future afforestations. And with this, I want to thank you very much for your attention and looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Silvio. Now we have some time for some questions or to start a little debate before the presentation of Achille. I encourage the audience to send us questions through the chat in YouTube. In any case, I would like to start the discussion asking one question to Silvio. What is your point of view when thinking about assisted migration? Should we decide on a basis of provenance first or species first? Because we have this like huge debate even inside the countries, that should we use, for example, Scotch pine from southern Spain, Sierra Nevada, Andalusia, in plantations, in new regeneration or afforestation in northern Spain, or should we change to other species which is more adapted?
Oh, that's a good question. We have the similar discussion. I think you need to do both. What you in the let's say afforestation decisions, you would need to make sure that looking at a species suitability, at a general suitability with the tools that are available today, and these are really, I think these species distribution models for climate change are relatively, have high evidence today. They are really high developed. So if you want to make a decision, look at these models. Is this a species in the future which is at high risk or is still at low risk, and then you make the decision on the provenance. So if you say, oh, there is a species where is a high risk, then you at least should think about, okay, that should not be my dominant species in the future. Yeah, but you might still work with that, maybe because you taking a better provenances might allow you to work with them for the next 50 years. And then you work with another second or third species to work with. However, if you're in an area where you say, oh, this will also be a fine species for the next, let's say for the long-term future, because there is from the tree species distribution very fine, you just can focus on the provenances. So I think both is needed somehow.
Okay, and related to that also, which is the because assisted migration, when we think in provenance using different provenances, has also some trade-offs, like you can contaminate genetic contamination of the other provenances, and how can we deal with that?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is information and data. There is what we need to have in the future much better. We need to understand where we get our seed sources from, what are the genetics that we have there, and how we can conserve them. So there should never be a case that, let's say, we don't want that there is, let's say, a seed stand, then we go there, we take one seeds and then harvest all the stand because then it's gone, and then we take the seeds and spread them all over Europe. That should never happen. It's important that we kind of maintain the provenances, let's say, either in situ, if the forests are still working. This is, for example, the UFOR gene. They have this concept of the gene genetic conservation units where it can be used in situ. We can, of course, establish also seed orchards where we can make sure that populations can be conserved ex situ. Or what we, for example, did also in our case, we have in the past found that some of our seed stands for oak are relatively small, and we were fearing that they might be gone within 30 years, because if the forest owner just make their regular harvest. So we said, okay, we take the seed sources and establish a new seed stand. And I would totally make sure that we do the one thing, the conservation of this genetic diversity, and then based on this, we do assisted migration and bring that together. Just doing nothing, just of having the fear to mixing something is probably also not a good strategy, because the changes that we have seen in the past, they have been so strong, and we need to consider there might be some events that we cannot foresee, some black swan events that might take problems for some forests or some species also in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. We have one question from our YouTube channel. Bruno Fadi is asking for assisted migration. Why limit the search of reproductive material to the best climate adapted source instead of maximizing the diversity using a composite provenancing approach? You have mentioned, you have covered that in that two questions.
I think it's very similar to what you asked before. I think in the utilization, I'm also fine with if we mix some species, and this is, for example, what we also what we also recommend to our foresters. For example, they may have a natural regeneration already for some species. However, the natural regeneration might not be sufficient for to recover the forest in a suitable time. And then he might think, oh, I do need to make some supplemental planting. Then we recommend, please take another provenance, plant them there, mark them somehow that you know which is them, and then you have a combination of your local materials with the better materials. And then evolution within the next 50 years might decide which one will survive. And this might be very close to what Bruno asked for.
Okay. When you presented these 3 lines to defend these forest ecosystem services, with, I think, like 3 strategies.
Yeah.
I've been really surprised last summertime visiting North Rhineland in Germany, when after this bark beetle disease and the problems with spruce, they were using Douglas fir, like a non-native species, replacing that spruce. So instead of going going step by step, like first strategy is to use native species, they have jumped to a non-native species, and that was quite surprising for me. And do you think it's something that we are going to see in Europe in the coming years?
Yeah, I think we'll see more often. We also see that a little bit more often. The point is, I would not make it. Let's say I would make it. Let's say independence of what do you expect from the forest. If this is a protection forest, which has the main role of producing timber, and where you just consider recreation, protection, and some other let's say function as secondary, then I understand that having a higher share of non-native tree species can be a solution, because like especially in terms of carbon sequestration and in terms of growth, Douglas fir is unbeatable on many sites. However, what I'm strictly against it, that we have, let's say, one recipe that we use on every site and for every owner category. I think it's important if we go, for example, in the protective forests, these are the forests in the mountains. I would not take so much risks of taking a non-native species. I would say, okay, I work rather with the native species. That means look at the forest function and the forest ecosystem service that we want, and then decide on that. And I see in some regions that we need it more. For example, also one part is, for example, also the riparian forests. Let's say riparian forest ecosystem in our region have the problems of let's say the first was the elm disease. Now we had the ash disease. Now we're getting also even some problems with the oak, and that means many of our native species are completely gone. So we don't have any tree species to play with. And then thinking about which of the non-native species can be a part of the future solution, but never a non-native species should be the only solution.
Okay, it's going to be like a little bit more weird what is native and non-native, because when we think in this assisted migration, we can think in a very bad situation with thinking maybe with Aleppo pine. It's in Germany. It's like it's not native. It's like Douglas fir. It's not the same, but it's almost the same. No.
That's the problem. You know, so our old categories might not fit anymore.
Okay, we have a last question from YouTube, also coming from Javier Ruiz, which is regarding to the CO2 capture. Do you mean that we can maintain coniferous trees, or would it be better to move to deciduous that maybe could capture more CO2? In that study, you have to.
I would still see a role of the conifer trees, of course, depending on where you are. But also, we still consider also that conifers in a mixture in lower shares might still be a suitable solution for the next 50 to 80 to 100 years. So we are also not, let's say, what we, for example, do not recommend in some lower mountain regions that just setting on non-native on the deciduous trees. We say, okay, you just can maintain a few, let's say, a small share of Norway spruce, and then make sure that you manage them adequately and have maybe 30% of them. You can still make some, let's say, on the one side, you can still produce some timber. Also, they are still quite productive. And then if something happens, you have other tree species which can take over. So I see really the main role today is in the mixture and better understanding the mixture, bringing the right species together. That's a much bigger issue. And I think also in our recommendation to practitioners, we have not thoroughly, let's say, communicated that the mixture is a main role, of course, but the mixture needs to consist of species, of provenance, and so on.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's time to move to the next presentation. Achille.
Okay, so
floor is yours.
I'll share the screen. Okay. So thank you very much to the organizer for giving me the possibility to present this work in this webinar. And my name is Achille Mauri, and I present a work that I did. So I'm currently working at the ETH of Zurich in two research groups, the forest ecology group led by Harald Buchmann and the forum group led by Verena Gries. However, here I'm presenting the work that I did at the University of Helsinki and the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. So in this talk, I will give you a synthetic overview of the main problems that European forests face in terms of climate change. And I will illustrate some possible ways we can tackle this problem and reduce the loss of tree species and the associated services. So European forests deliver a multitude of forest ecosystem services, such as they are fundamental for water regulation, but also for soil protection. They provide wood for heating our houses. They produce the wood for construction material. They're important for pulpwood, but also for food and for cultural and aesthetic and recreational values. However, European forests are highly threatened by climate change, which and increasingly threatened in the future by climate change and natural disturbances such as fire, insect outbreaks, and windfall. And this is a map that we made for current vulnerability of European forests to natural disturbances that show that, for instance, in the Mediterranean, this area will be quite vulnerable. So in the future, we will need to shape tree species communities that will be more resilient to expected increased climate change-driven disturbances. When we look at the global temperature, we see that by the end of the century, the global temperature will increase between 1 and 5 degrees, depending on the climate emission scenario that we are looking at. And things are getting even worse for the Mediterranean, where the temperature are projected to exceed 5 degrees under an RCP 8.5 scenarios. On the right side, we have so I put some of the material that I produced in a publication a while ago, where we plotted the changes in precipitation by the end of the century, according to 11 regional climate models from Coordinates Europe. And as you can see, there's a dramatic reduction in precipitation over the Mediterranean. In this work, we also mapped the changes in Mediterranean climate domain relative to the current time for the year 2080. And we see that the Mediterranean climate domain, so the area that are in green, is expanding to northern latitudes and is going through a contraction at lower latitude. And by the end of the century, many areas in Europe are projected to change from not arid to arid condition, and this will have tremendous consequences on the forest ecosystem, on tree species, and the associated forest ecosystem services, but also on the Natura 2000 protective network, the image on the right side. So when we look instead at the tree species shifts, this is an example for Norway spruce. We see that by the end of the century, the climate niche of the great majority of the European tree species will significantly change, and this will happen during the lifespan of the trees that we are planting now. Therefore, the tree species composition is projected to change. Actually, the potential range of many tree species is projected to shift at higher altitudes and then and northern latitudes. There will be range erosion on their southern edge and a potential colonization to new areas on their northern edges. However, here we have a substantial problem that most of the European tree species have limited dispersal ability, and then they will not be able to occupy by natural dispersal the climate niche, and therefore to colonize new territories. This most likely will have tremendous consequences on the forest ecosystem services that we are so much dependent on. So the take-home message here is that the trees have a long lifespan and low dispersal ability. We need to consider which tree species and where may thrive decades from now if we want to prevent and reduce the loss of forest services. A possible solution could be assisted migration, which has been presented in many studies in the literature. However, this migration has also been often debated because of ecological reasons. But actually, maybe this doesn't really matter in a European landscape that has been managed for millennia. On the left side, we have the European forest over the last century, which shows that the European forest have gone through a substantial deforestation. Forests have been cleared to create space for cropland, to create space for pasture, to get full wood to warm up the houses, but also to be used for construction material. Indeed, in a work that we did a few years ago, we compared the structure of the actual forest versus the structure of a potential forest, and we see that we show that the European forests are very far from naturalness. So now to try to answer these questions, we develop in our group U Trees for Future, which is a collection of tree species distribution map for the future until the year 2100 for 68 tree species, which include important commercially important tree species, but also ecologically important tree species. This dataset is based on half 500,000 tree occurrence dataset that has been published in 2017, together with other ancillary data, especially for the some Mediterranean species. The dataset, so for each single species, we look at two different dispersal scenarios. So a natural dispersal scenario, which shows that basically most of the European tree species are not able to move much farther from their current location, and an unlimited dispersal scenario where the tree species are able to disperse throughout the landscape wherever the climate allows them to grow. And then we look at two different emission scenario, a moderate emission scenario, RCP 4.5, and a high emission scenario, RCP 8.5. And also for two land use scenarios. And you here there's a QR code if you want to have a look at the maps. So here, this is a workflow. I don't want to scare you with this workflow, so I'm not going to walk through this workflow, but just to show you, to get a feeling of the amount of data that we process. So we run 6 different species distribution models for 67 tree species, for 11 regional climate models, for 2 emission scenarios, 3 time slice, and 2 dispersal scenarios. So we got something like more than 50,000 layers. This is an example of an example of the tree species changes by the end of the century. Here we consider, so in green we have the area that are considered to be stable, in orange the area that will be decolonized, and in blue the area that will be suitable, but they will not be occupied because of dispersal limitation. Similar thing we have for Mediterranean tree species, and let's go back to the ecosystem services. So we were interested to know what happens to forest ecosystem services in a changing climate. And so this is what we look in this publication that we did last year, and the material that I'm showing you in the next slide is actually present in this publication. So first of all, we extracted a set of 7 ecosystem services from the European Atlas of Forestry Species, which we published in 2016. And in the European Atlas, for each of the 3 species, you have a chapter that describes quite many things, among which there's a section on importance and usage. And from this section, we extracted these forest ecosystem services in a binary form for all the species. Then what we did is to look at the changes in tree species richness. And so we have, so basically we show that under a scenario of natural dispersal, species will lose a substantial portion of their range. And this is the area that the plots that we have on the left side, the natural dispersal for RCP 4.5 on the upper part and RCP 8.5 on the lower part. However, this will not, so the great majority of the European tree species will not be able to colonize new area to compensate for the losses. So this will lead in a dramatic reduction of local diversity and his of services. However, this will be primarily an effect of dispersal limitation and not of climate. Indeed, if we look at the future pattern of climate suitability, so the image that we see on the right, so the unlimited dispersal panel, we see that the number of species having a climate niche compatible with local conditions in most of the European localities will largely surpass that of species that are lost due to climate change. So basically, these are the blue areas in the map. So in other words, this means that in a theoretical scenario of full management, we will have in most locality an ample choice of species that are well adapted to local conditions that we could choose to top up the loss of local diversity. However, one thing that we see from this map is also that will be a dramatic species loss in the Mediterranean, and this will of course also under the unlimited dispersal scenario. Now, let's look at what happens under a scenario, under the natural dispersal scenario, so a scenario where we don't put in place assisted migration. On the upper panel, we have the 3 species that contribute to each of the 7 ecosystem services that I described before. And on the second and third row, we have the changes relative to the current time by the end of the century for the second row for the RCP 4.5, and on the third row for the RCP 8.5. What you can see is that by the end of the century, the provision of ecosystem services will decrease on average in Europe by 15% for the RCP 4.5 scenario, and by 23% under the RCP 8.5 scenario. And furthermore, in the Mediterranean, the loss of services will be quite conspicuous of 52% under the RCP 4.5 scenario, and up to 70% under the RCP 8.5 scenario. So that there will be a dramatic reduction of 3 species and forest and associated forest ecosystem services. So to try to counteract this loss of services, we came up with a series of scenarios of assisted migration that where for each of the scenario, the 3 species that have been lost due to climate change are replaced from the pool of potentially colonizing 3 species, so the blue area that we saw in the previous image. And we do this by 3 different optimization strategy. So we use random optimization strategies where the lost 3 species are replaced by randomly choosing between the potentially colonizing 3 species, or by using a maxi optimization strategies where the 3 species are replaced by maximizing a specific ecosystem services. And we have a slide on this in the next slide. Then another strategy is the multi-optimization strategy that maybe it's also the most interesting. In this strategy, we test all possible set of replacement species to identify the ones that offer the best compromise in optimizing all the services at once. And this taking consideration 2 important aspects that are functional diversity and co-occurrence. So just to give you some number for the RCP 8.5, we tested more than 3 billion sets of 3 species. And the image on the upper, on the lower corner, this is a kind of summary for the RCP 8.5 scenario. I'm not going to walk you through all this image, but I will present a few case studies in the next slide. So concerning the maximum optimization strategy, so on the upper panel we have the what will happen if we don't put in place assisted migration. So we will have a massive loss of forest services, and on the rest of the row we have the maximization, the maxi optimization for each targeted services. Let's look, for instance, at the construction services in this case, and we see that when we look at the construction services, this is the one that is maximized. So is you see that over the entire Europe, there's a substantial area that is turning from a kind of yellowish to bluish. We look at a bit more in detail, we see that the optimization of one specific services, or the construction services on the left side, can also bring benefit to the other services on the right side. So it's a kind of win-win strategy. Now, just a few words concerning the multi-optimization scenario. So in this case, the strategy optimizes all the services at once and considers two important ecological aspects, as I mentioned before. One is functional diversity, which favors the selection of species that are functionally close to the lost ones. And another important ecological aspect is the co-occurrence, which favors the selection of species that have a tendency to co-occur. So for the functional diversity, we selected a series of functional traits that are, so we did a literature review, and we selected those functional traits that are expected to promote resilience to climate change and forest disturbances in the future. Now let's look a bit at the result for the multi-optimization strategies. So you see, again, this is on the upper part, we have the scenario of no assisted migration, where there will be a massive loss of forest services. And on the second part, we have on the second row, we have the multi-optimization scenario. In this case, you see that many areas will turn from kind of reddish to bluish. So there will be an improvement of the forest ecosystem services. And on the lower row, we have the difference between the two. So we see that on average in Europe, forest services will, so the forest service loss will be reduced by 21%. In 22% of the locality, there will be an increase in service availability. And however, in some regions, such as the southern Iberia, there will be no margins of improvement, at least with the set of 3 species that we currently have in Europe. Then we thought of coming up with kind of an index that would provide a synthesis of all these 7 ecosystem services, and we called it Scientific Index of Ecosystem Services. And we presented this on the left side. So here I'm showing the changes by the end of the 21st century relative to the current time. On the left side, we have the scenario of no adaptation. And on the central part, we have the multi-optimization scenario. On the upper row, we have the moderate emission scenario, RCP 4.5. And on the lower part, we have the high emission scenario, RCP 8.5. Again, we see that there's the multi-optimization strategy is actually doing a nice job, especially in Central Europe. However, there will be dramatic, so in the Mediterranean, we will be able to reduce the loss of the services, but still the losses will be quite substantial. On the right side, we repeated the same analysis. So the analyses are displayed for macroecological regions. So the different color lines. The dashed line is for the scenario of no assisted migration, and the continuous line is for the multi-optimization scenario. And in black, we have instead the average over Europe. And we see that in some regions, such as in the Boreal region, even under a scenario of no assisted migration, there will be an increase of services, and this will be further improved with assisted migration. In other locations, such as the Alps, the trend will be reverted from a loss of services to a gain of services. And in the Mediterranean region, if we look at the RCP 4.5, there will be a substantial reduction of the losses, but this will remain still important. And things are getting slightly worse for the RCP 8.5 scenario. So the message here is that assisted migration has the potential to substantially reduce the expected loss of forest services and even to increase them regionally. However, the projected acidification of the Mediterranean will trigger dramatic tree species services losses that, however, will not be replaced with, at least with the set of tree species that we consider in these studies. And now I'm close to the conclusion, so a synthesis. So under a scenario with no adaptation actions, by the end of the century, the loss of forest services is projected to be conspicuous, 23% on average in Europe. The target optimization scenario, which aims at maximizing a specific services, can substantially mitigate the losses. The multi-optimization strategies have the potential to improve at once the availability of all the services, while shaping tree species communities that are more resilient to climate change and forest disturbances. This is because it incorporates two important ecological aspects, such as functional diversity and co-occurrence. However, in the Mediterranean, the loss of services will be quite dramatic, even with the most optimistic management scenario. The multi-optimization scenario will be able to reduce substantially the losses, but this will still remain high, at least with the pool of tree species that we have used in this study. And with this, I conclude, and I would be happy to answer any question you might have.
Thank you very much, Achille. Really nice presentation. Silvio once also. We have like two great keynote speakers today. Now we have some time to introduce some question or some debate to Achille's presentation. I encourage the audience again to send us some questions through our YouTube channel. In any case, just to break the ice, I have one question for Achille, which is, your presentation has left us a little bit frozen with that dramatic loss of species and ecosystem services in the Mediterranean region. What role can play some species that you have mentioned you haven't considered, like maybe North African species or even other continent species, like I'm thinking in Australia, maybe that they have also that arid areas. How can this Northern Africa or even other continent species can slow down this dramatic situation?
Yeah, actually, one of this is a very good question, because one of the things that we couldn't include in our study for the Mediterranean tree species are the tree occurrences for the Northern Africa. Actually, we wanted to include them, but actually we went through the literature and through the various databases that were available, but we couldn't find proper materials that we could use for this one. So in a way, for instance, those species that are present on both sides of the Mediterranean, in our study, maybe as we are not able to, I don't know, for instance, Quercus ilex that could be present on both sides, we don't have the occurrences of Quercus ilex for the North Africa. So and maybe we are not we are not capturing those climatic conditions that might be even more extreme than, I don't know, than in Spain, in Italy, and that are present in Northern Africa. And so in a way, our result might result more pessimistic than what actually they are. Probably this will not change that much, but this is something that that we could look into the future. But and maybe also the conference that we are attending in the next few weeks could provide some indication of where to get this data, where to harvest this data, and to improve the analysis for the future. Then, there are another possibility is to include other 3 species that are present, for instance, in Northern Africa. One could be, for instance, Cedrus atlantica, that is also planted, for instance, in France, and it seems that it's doing quite well. And this could be another species that we could try in the future. Then implementing in our modeling framework 3 species that are coming from overseas, maybe it would be we need to carefully think about it because of the problems that the ecological problems that you have with species hybridization and the spread of pests. So this is a quite risky possibility that needs to be evaluated very, very carefully.
Okay, yes, and indeed, there would be, I can imagine if we could include other species, maybe some of the ecosystem services could be reversed, but others not, because maybe even if you have other species, coming from the North Africa area, other species that could grow in that Mediterranean area, maybe they are not allowed to produce timber for construction, I imagine, or other kind of, because their conditions are so.
Yeah, exactly. For this, I mean, it depends also on your objective, and also, well, this is also there's a lot of talking about all the different policies of the European Commission, the biodiversity strategy or the bioeconomy strategy. So it depends a bit where you want to look at. So in this work, we thought that, for instance, the multi-optimization strategy can provide a good compromise among all the policies, because it's looking at improving all the forest ecosystem services at once, but it provides shaping also forest communities that will be resilient to future expected climate changes and increasing natural disturbances. However, if you want to look at, for instance, at the use of wood for carbon substitution, or maybe well, you need to choose a different set of species, and maybe the example that you were mentioned before about Douglas fir. I mean, this is so now I'm currently working in Switzerland, and when I go to meetings, we also with forest practitioners, this is not such of a hot topic. Like, I mean, it was not such a delicate issue like it was maybe in the past. Now it's becoming more a common issue in this discussion, and Douglas fir is actually considered as a potential species for the future, especially with all the problems that we have with Norway spruce, and that Silvio has shown previously.
Yeah, we have also a question from the audience. Bruno Fadi is asking, how do you see the implementation of that multi-optimization scenario? Is it feasible? How do you see that?
Well, as I mentioned in the paper, I think this work can provide some scientific sounding result of what 3 species we can plant in any given locality under a future expected climate. However, you have to keep in mind that the spatial resolution of our analysis are at 10-kilometer resolution, so we cannot really provide information to forest practitioner for a single stand, but we can provide some guidelines which 3 species could be used in the future. For this, maybe you need to use different models, some mechanistic models. that give you that are able to look at different aspects. They provide also quantitative information about the tree species. They provide you information about dead wood, and but these have the difficulties that few species are parameterized, and it's really difficult to look at a higher number of tree species as we have done on the study, like 67 tree species with a mechanistic model. So that there are some pro and cons about the application of each single model. And in a way, the species distribution models allow you to look at this aspect in a quite simple way. Then, the work that I presented here is looking at the species and not at the provenance. So the work that Silvio has shown for the 7 tree species in Europe, this is I think also the future where we have to go. But as Silvio has mentioned, there's some limitation in the data set of the provenances.
Okay, we have a question coming for our co-speaker, Silvio, also. If you can explain in more detail the change of functional diversity that you modeled, and if you consider some specific traits.
Is this for me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. If you can explain a little, we are getting out of time. This is going to be the last question. If you can explain a little bit that change on the functional diversity that you have modeled.
Yeah, for the functional diversity, as I showed in the presentation, we basically use the different functional traits that we downloaded from the trait database, and the selection of the traits, we look at those traits that are more important for in a climate change perspective. And for this, we use some algorithms that are available, some libraries that are available online to calculate functional diversity. And we did this for each locality through all the entire Europe. And as I said, the selection of the 3 species that are used for replacing the lost 3 species are taken from the pool of potentially colonizing 3 species, so the kind of the blue area that we saw in that graph of the 3 species richness.
Okay. So just getting, so that means you do not see whether some of the traits are not being there anymore because there cannot be 3 species replace some of the traits there, or you haven't looked at it in detail.
No, so basically we have the environmental space that we use for all the traits, and we look at this environmental space, the change between the present and
yeah. Okay, but maybe we leave that for another discussion.
It's a good discussion. You can continue. You too. I'm going to wrap up with 4 or highlighting 4 or 5 conclusions, and then we can go to finish our webinar. First conclusion would be, and I think could be like the most important thing, is that assisted migration is a must for Europe. Is not something we have. We know that it has trade-offs, but we have seen lots of impacts if we don't consider that assisted migration, and that should be done considering the combination of provenance and species approaches. So this is, I think, the main conclusion of our webinar. Also, to mention the major role of the region, of the Mediterranean region, the major role that can play in the long-term preservation of forest resources, because that assisted migration is something that is going to happen through a long period of time, and many of the key species are coming from the Mediterranean region. Maybe another thing we have covered a little bit is that we have to rethink what is native and non-native when we use assisted migration. Is not that easy that the concept we had before, and now we have to rethink this concept. And then, just to finish, that we foresee very important impacts on carbon storage, so our climate policy, also to biodiversity, and but also impacts in other ecosystem services, and maybe that can lead or rethink that this assisted migration should be considered in European level as a European policy or as a European strategy, because it's quite important for the future to maintain that ecosystem services in Europe. So I'd like to highlight these 4 conclusions, and I can now give the floor to Mercedes to close our webinar.
Thank you very much, Pablo. Thank you, everybody that is connected online, and special thanks to Silvio and Achille for the incredible, interesting presentations and for the stimulant discussion. I would like to take this opportunity to invite everybody to participate in the 8th Mediterranean Forest Week. Despite the fact that we reach capacity for participation in person, we are still receiving registrations for participate online, and I think this will be a very good opportunity for everybody to continue this stimulant discussion during the Mediterranean Forest Week. So this is all from my side. Again, thank you very much, Silvio and Achille, for your presentation, and looking forward to continue this conversation in person in Barcelona.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you very much. Bye.